Greetings and salutations, comrades. It's me again. I know very few, in fact, probably almost no one, have been watching or have noticed, but I have been gone from YouTube for some time due to personal and fairly inexplicable reasons. So I am coming extremely late to the party in this regard, but well, here's my reaction to the Witcher trailer. Now, this is going to be my first unscripted video, so if you hear me babbling or just seeking for words, feel free to skip over it, as I will eventually, hopefully, get to the point. This is also not going to be a initial reaction. This is mostly a review of what we see and hear, as of course I have already seen the Witcher trailer and I already have my thoughts more or less set on it. So, without further ado, let us begin.
I remember hearing stories about witches.
Now, the first few shots we have are of course of Henry Cavill as Geralt himself, and I gotta say, from all the interviews he's done and just generally his attitude about his role, I really feel bad for Cavill because you can see he actually does like the books, like he's actually a fan of the story and the setting and so on, and of course he also played the games, so he's pretty heavily invested, and in every shot in this trailer he stands out. He is like the one thing I can always look to and feel somewhat reassured because, well, he just looks like he's good for the role. Of course, there have been a number of complaints, some of them valid, some of them less so, saying like he's too young, he's too swole, he doesn't really have the roughed up appearance of Geralt. Those are all fair complaints, but in general I think that he looks similar enough to Geralt to be able to play him, A, and B, as long as he is able to embody the character and at least remotely resembles Geralt, which he does, then I think it is not a major issue. Would I have preferred someone else? Well, I had my own picks for the main character, but seeing Cavill in full costume, and especially after seeing him talk about his role, I think that he is going to be a standout in the show. If nothing else, his performance is probably going to be remembered. But as to the clips themselves, we see Geralt walking only in his shirt, and I have to comment on the Witcher medallion he has around his neck as well. I I'm not going to say I don't like it, because it's a cool design. I just think the game design was a lot cooler, and I think that this is just... And the trailer does this a lot. It tries to needlessly distance itself from the games as much as possible. I'm not sure why this is, maybe to avoid a possible copyright strike from CD Projekt Red based on character design and so on, maybe just because Sapkowski really doesn't like the games and the series is trying to pander more to Sapkowski and the book fans than to the game fans. I have no clue, but either way, I do think that the game design for the medallion is cooler, just plain and simple cooler. Of course, this design is also not bad, and I don't really see an issue with it. I just felt like pointing it out that I think, and we're going to see this a lot more with some more egregious things, but I think they're just trying to needlessly distance themselves from the games, which I don't think is a good idea, but anyway, let's continue.
Is it true what they say?
Elves are the original sorcerers of the continent.
6 seconds, and there's already so much wrong with this. Jesus, oh Lord Almighty. Now, let's start with the less controversial part. Let's start with what is being said in this shot. Elves are the original sorcerers of the continent. That's just blatantly false. like even if you discount the Vrans and the Bobodlaks, who were like the original sentient species inhabiting the continent, as far as we know, who did possess magic of their own of some kind, you can discard them because we don't really know that much about them. That still leaves you with gnomes and dwarves. The gnomes and the dwarves are both races that have been present in the continent for far longer than the elves. In fact, both the elves and the humans are immigrants in essence. One are just more successful than the others. Either way, the statement which is set in the background is blatantly false, and it's also misleading for the casual audience, as these are definitely not elves. And what they are is even worse. Because, well, if elves were all dark skinned and had a bunch of rags for clothes, well, that would be an odd choice for the costume designer, but at least it wouldn't be lore breaking. But the Dryads, because these, what you can see on the frame behind me in Ciri, and I'm not sure which Dryad that is, of course, I have no real way of knowing, but these are definitely Dryads. Now, we'll get to the issue of race bending within the story. Oh, we will, but there's another frame which probably illustrates it even better. But my biggest issue with them is not actually their skin tone, because Dryads in the books are said to be able to have a brownish skin tone, of course. Theirs is more like tree bark and less like, a Middle Eastern tan, but, you take what you can get, and that's not really an issue for me. I do appreciate they gave them the war paint. I definitely don't appreciate what they're wearing. Now, first of all, the clothes they're wearing. The clothes they're wearing are, well, they just look like rags. The Dryads are meant to be dressed in something like, very scantily because, well, they don't really use clothes all that much. But they're not meant to be dressed like homeless people. Like, they actually do have a sense of fashion, and the Dryads living in the center of Brokilon, the ones who don't actually always watch on their posts on the borders of the forests, who are not on active duty all the time, actually can create very fancy dresses. But the biggest offenders by far are their weapons and the metal bracelets on their hands. And this is where we get to the really juicy part, because this is clearly meant to illustrate a very different kind of theme, or a very different kind of feeling. It's meant to evoke a feeling of the exotic, the Middle East, and uh, you know Africa perhaps, where these kinds of bracelets are actually worn by the warriors of the clan, and where spears are of course very common as a weapon. But this is just lore breaking for the Dryads. Like, that's just plain terrible. You see, the Dryads, well, to call them environmentalists is misleading, because what happens when a young Dryad is created from a human child is it basically gets mind wiped by the forest of Brokilon through the waters of Brokilon, which are these magical waters with extremely powerful properties of healing, but also wiping memories. And if a young girl, human or elven, is given these waters of Brokilon at an early age, she forgets her past life, her human name, her human past, and so on, and becomes almost perfectly and utterly devoted to Brokilon as an entity and to Aithne as the queen of the Dryads. And this process, as far as we know, is irreversible and mutative, because it of course changes their skin color, it changes their hair color, it changes their physique, and it most importantly changes how their brains work, in effect making them a part of the forest. And of course, as a part of the forest, the Dryads don't really kill plants, you might say. Like, well, of course, they're not so casual as to not step on grass, but they are not going to be cutting down trees anytime soon, and they are definitely not going to be using metalwork. In fact, all fire is strictly prohibited within Brokilon Forest, and the Dryads use different methods for illumination in the dark. Fire is very strictly prohibited, and so are most man-made things. In fact, the only weapon the Dryads know and use is the bow. And, well, they cheat when creating those bows because they use magic to sing them into life. Like, just create them out of the wood of the tree without causing the tree any pain. It is cheating and it is exceptionally unfair, but, well, the Dryads are not meant to be fair, they're not meant to be heroic. They are mind-wiped soldiers of an ancient forest, and, well, I'm not sure how if they're going to be portrayed like that. I suspect rather not, but definitely what we see on screen here is lore-breaking. Even if we forget about the skin tone, forget about how they look physically, the way in which they are dressed, and especially the way in which they are armed, is just plain wrong. The swords they carry, I'm not even going to get into that because no Dryad has ever carried a sword because they despise everything made by humans, and the spears they carry are it's just so plainly wrong, and I don't really see the reason for it. Like, why couldn't you give them all bows? You could even have them dressed in a similar fashion, albeit without the metal bracelets on their hands, but why? I just don't see a reason for it, other than to make them exotic and to look like something completely different. But by far the biggest offender is Aitne, which I believe, at least, that this is Aitne over
The
here.
original sorceress.
Yes, well, it doesn't have to be, of course. She doesn't look anything like Aitne, so it's hard to tell, but from the way the other Dryads look at her, the way they part before her, and the way the camera focuses on her, you would think this is Aitne. Aitne, which I must mention, is in the books called Silver-Haired Aitne, because of her, you guessed it, silver hair. Now, not only does she not have silver hair, she looks nothing like the almost ethereal Celtic spirit she was in the books, because the Dryads, of course, are heavily inspired by Celtic mythology or Celtic mythology. I'm not sure which way to pronounce it correctly, but Aitne is less a Dryad and more the embodiment of the forest itself. Of course, she is a Dryad, biologically speaking, but, well, she has this aura of mystique around her. She's almost, an ancient being, like something you don't see every day, ethereal, beautiful, and so on. If this is Aitne, and I do suspect it is from the way she's being treated by the other Dryads, of course I still could be completely wrong, but I don't think I am. Well, I don't really have to tell you what's wrong with her now, do I? She looks nothing like Aitne. She doesn't look like something out of Celtic mythology. She looks like something out of African folklore or even from African history because there is nothing magical about her. She doesn't even have the correct skin tone because while some Dryads do have olive or brown skin, Aitne has green skin, if I remember correctly. Like, she is this kind of Lady of the Lake character. And there are several Lady of the Lake characters in the books, and Aitne is definitely one of the more prominent ones, at least physically. But, well, yeah, that's about me done with the ranting on the Dryads, and they are probably one of the biggest faults I've seen from the trailer. They just look atrocious, honestly. So I am not looking forward to the parts in Brocculon Forest, and there are unfortunately probably going to be a lot of them because Brocculon is a fairly important place within the story. We actually go there 2 times directly, and we return there many times in flashbacks. So that's going to be interesting.
Of the continent. When humans and monsters arrive.
So, this is interesting. We are getting the Yennefer origin story, which is okay. I am fully for that because it helps flesh out Yennefer more directly as a major character, and there's nothing wrong with her origin story. Like, Yennefer was a quadroon, which means she had a quarter of elvish blood in her veins. She was therefore not mutated, but misshapen, you might say, and she was tormented by her father when she was young because of this. She discovered she had magical abilities and enrolled in the Aretuza Academy on Thanet. And, well, the rest, I suppose, we'll see within the story. But Yennefer is a very interesting character, and her origin story is also very well done. So I'm looking forward to how they are going to portray that within the series. The character to her left here, or well, to her right and to my left, is probably Tissaia Devry, who is hands down my favorite sorceress within the story. My favorite magic user in general, probably. Because, well, she's an awesome character, and I wish we got to see more of her in the books. So, making her a part of Yennefer's origin story. Of course, she is a part in the books as well, but we don't really see that part. We just hear about it. It's probably a good choice. I don't know either of the actresses who are playing Yennefer and Tissaia, respectively. And, well, Tissaia's character does mostly look the part. She has this kind of stern, professional English look, you might say, like Tissaia had. And Yennefer's actress, well, she doesn't look a whole lot like Yennefer I imagined, or well, anyone else imagined, but she's not nearly the worst choice for her. Like, I could imagine a plenty of worse ideas for who should play Yennefer. So it really depends on how she's going to sell the character. And seeing as I have never seen either of these two actresses in anything, I can't really judge that part. So, all in all, Yennefer looks acceptable, and I have no idea how well she's in tune with the character, so we have to wait and see.
Elves taught humans how to turn chaos into magic.
Now, I'm going to briefly return here because
Elves
this
taught
is
humans how to turn chaos into magic.
very interesting, and we also get a better look of Tissaia's costume. I'm going to say that I don't like the costumes being used here. The reason why is probably because you can tell they're costumes. Like, most of the clothes we see within the trailer, with maybe the exception of Geralt, they just don't look like they're used. They look like they're costumes, like in a theater. They don't have the realistic wear and tear of most costumes, at least not in my opinion. And I'm no expert in the costume design, but something like, Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings always had far more convincing costumes for some reason. I can't really put my finger on it, but Tissaia's costume and so many other costumes within the trailer they just look fake. They don't look like something people might actually wear. And maybe that's also because of the style which Tissaia is wearing, which, well, the setting of The Witcher is a combination of many, many, many time periods, but most prominent is the 14th and 15th century. This is not a 15th century costume. This looks something almost out of the Victorian era, just a bit more colorful. So I'm not sure what to think about it. On the one hand, it does suit Tissaia. On the other hand, I would have preferred to see something a bit more medieval, a bit more, thematic to the setting. But, well, the far bigger problem is that it just doesn't look like clothes, it looks like a costume. So that's just my 2 cents on the issue. I haven't seen actually anyone else object to this, but overwhelming majority of costumes within the trailer they look like costumes. They don't look like clothes people might actually wear. It's the same feeling I got when watching Full Metal Alchemist Netflix movie. For some reason, the uniforms and the clothes in general in the movie just didn't feel like realistic clothes. They felt like, well, costumes, and that's exactly the same feeling I'm getting right here. Although I have to admit, these costumes are still far better than in that Full Metal Abomination. So I hope this gets improved with time, or maybe these are just really bad shots and I'm getting excited for no reason. But generally, I just am not a massive fan of the costumes they chose.
And then
No, I really have to start pausing these sooner. But this is interesting because here we get an armor that actually looks like armor, and those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you'll find out soon enough. But this armor is Cintran armor, and you can see that because, well, these same soldiers are later fighting under the banner of the lion, and there is only one country in the Witcher universe which has a lion in its banner, Sintra. But this armor actually looks fairly okay. It is, of course, also not medieval, like the helmets they're wearing, those are bourgeonnets. They're French and Western European helmets used from, I think, 17th century onwards. I'm not sure whether they existed in the 16th century as well. I don't think so, but I could be wrong. But they generally do mesh together far better with the medieval setting than the other armor we see, which is just terrible in every aspect. This armor looks okay. It's not too fancy, just fancy enough for these to be some kind of royal guard or something along those lines. It's fairly I don't want to say realistic because I'm not a complete expert in the armor department, but there's nothing too outlandish about them. They don't have enormous shoulder pads, they don't have overly decorated cuirasses, and well, I generally just don't see much of an issue with it. Of course, it's not completely medieval, but it's a lot closer than the other armor we have in the series, which we'll get to that, don't you worry.
The humans slow.
Now, this is going to be a problem if this is what I think this is. I'm not sure who the fellow talking to Yennefer at this point is. Like, it could be any character because I can't really get a clear picture of his ears. However, I do think his ears are pointy. Again, I could be wrong. If I am wrong, I apologize. But I do think this is an elf. And this is what one of my friends who said it's going to get Americanized was referring to, and I'm not saying I didn't want to believe him. I wanted to hope he was wrong. I wanted to hope he was crying wolf. Because I thought that the creators would have enough respect for the source material not to Americanize it so much. But they did. We are getting the oppressed minorities from the real world treatment for the series. This is going to be a tough one to swallow. You know, you'd think that a story so explicitly concerned with racism and otherness as The Witcher would at least get a free pass in this regard without dragging real-world politics into the story. But no, of course, we are getting black elves, because why wouldn't we? It's not like the elves have just as much atrocities on their hands as the humans, if not more. It's not like in their own homeworld the elves are even more brutal towards humans than the humans are brutal towards the elves in our world, or, well, in the Witcher world. It's not like the racial dichotomy doesn't really need to be highlighted this much without breaking the lore, and I'll get to that in a minute. But no, we're getting black elves because, well, we need to highlight that humans are bad and nature-loving elves are the good guys oppressed and enslaved all along. You know, funny thing is, if you read the story, if you read the books, I'm not sure you're going to be very sympathetic towards the elves because the elves brought everything that's now happening to them upon themselves. And of course, that doesn't mean that what's happening to them is a good thing or that you shouldn't feel bad for them, but you're going to have a tough time because elves are just so unapologetically arrogant. Jackasses, most of them at least. And, well, the only reason they are in the situation they are currently is their own arrogance and stupidity. So I'm fairly sure that this is an indication that much of the lore is going to get so-called blackwashed, you might say, or maybe whitewashed is the better word, because I am certain they are going to at least minimize how guilty the elves were in their own destruction. and just how evil humans are, of course. Now, humans in the Witcher story can be pretty evil, especially in the racism department. But that doesn't mean that humanity in and of itself is special in this regard. In fact, Sapkowski goes explicitly to point this out when he takes Ciri to the Witcher world, or excuse me, to the Elven world, the world of the NL, and there she sees humans being treated as literal cattle, as literal animals by the elven overlords. And there's no real indication that the elves of the Witcher world feel any different about humans. In fact, if anything, they have an even lower opinion of humans, and they want to just outright commit a genocide against humans if they ever get a chance. Because, well, they tried to use humans as forced labor, and they saw where that ended. It got them. So, yeah, this is not a good indication at all. And of course, the skin tones being all over the place is a major issue as well for medieval Central European based story, but I'll get to that later. Or maybe in a separate video. Let's continue for now. Also, this is something of a lore conflict because we don't actually know whether the elves were the first to teach humans magic, because we definitely know that the humans had mages of their own, and famous mages who actually founded the magical academies. The magical academies were not founded by the elves at all, and in fact very few elves studied at them. But we don't know whether the elves were the ones who actually taught humans magic, but we definitely know that the most prominent sorcerers in the world were not elven. Now, this I am 100% sure is Fanet, and this I am 100% sure looks lame. It just looks unimpressive. I mean, Fanet in the story is a floating island, and that's probably a bit too much to ask from the special effects, maybe, although I don't think so actually, because you could have had just one shot of the island to establish that it's floating in the air. I'm not sure why this did not happen. Of course, I could be wrong, and this could be an entirely different place, but everything from the rope bridge to the tower of the seagull, which is located on the right, to the way it's positioned near the sea, tells me this is Fanet. And that's just bad in my opinion, because Fanet is a sorceress academy. It's not for male sorcerers, it's for female sorcerers. And one thing you learn very quickly about female sorcerers is they're just they like the pretty things in life. They will go to absurd lengths to look stylish, and for their surroundings to look stylish as well. And so Fanet has these absolutely beautiful gardens all around it in several tiers. It's a floating island with several tiers of gardens and a beautiful palace serving as the main school. This looks like a military fortress. Like, this is something I'd expect from Ban Art, and even then, this looks sci-fi. This to me speaks Dune. It doesn't speak Witcher. It speaks 40k and Dune. It really doesn't seem like something out of a European fantasy. Maybe this is just them trying to be extremely different from the games, but I honestly can't tell why they did this. And I also suppose that this is the Tower of the Seagull. Well, we don't really get an apt description of the tower, but it also looks pretty sci-fi to me. But either way, if this is Fanet, then this is a major disappointment. Of course, it's perfectly possible that the island is floating and we just don't see it from the other side, but either way, I really, really don't like the way this is shown. So, I hope we don't get a whole lot of aerial shots.
Chaos is the most dangerous thing in this world.
So here we finally have Cyrilla, and she is the other character who looks very well picked. Of course, she looks older than she is supposed to be in the books, but that is not really an issue because, well, first of all, child actors, we don't really want to take the risk, and second of all, Ciri goes through a lot of stuff within the books that's, well, pretty graphic and pretty pretty terrifying. I'm looking forward to all the articles that are definitely going to come out about the brutality and sexism of the Witcher show, and they are coming. They are already in production. Don't you worry about it. But yeah, aging Ciri up is probably for the best for all parties involved, because it's going to make the actress a whole lot less uncomfortable filming certain scenes. It's going to make her capable of portraying a wider range of emotions, and also I do hope that they actually make her go through some kind of physical training, because Ciri goes through that a lot, and by the end of the third book she's actually really skilled. She's a very good acrobat, and she's also a very good swordswoman. So I do hope they at least try to portray that, and they don't just use jump cuts to make her seem like a badass. So yeah, aging her up is definitely a good idea, and well, she looks good. She looks like Cyrilla. The one thing that is kind of on the nose is the eyebrows, the way they are highlighted, or at least I think they are highlighted. I can't stop looking at them for some reason. They just seem off. But apart from that, everything, the eyes, the face, the hair, the costume, it looks okay. It looks good actually. So points for that.
But without control.
So now I suppose this is Tisaya saying this. Chaos is the most dangerous thing in the world, but without control, chaos will kill you. I'm not sure in what context she's saying that, because that's a very strange word structure to be using. But I suppose she's talking about the military applications of magic, which of course are going to be a theme early on in Yennefer's story. Of course, the Battle of Sodden Hill and so on. And I suppose we are going to see Sodden Hill, at least partially. So I'm not sure what is going on in these last few pictures. The only thing I can tell you for sure is that this right here is going to be the rape of Sintra. And that's a very, very interesting event, because it's going to set Nilfgaard up as the big bad guy. So I'm wondering just how brutal they are going to be. They felt the need to stress that The Witcher is not for kids, which worries me mightily, because, well, if you actually need to stress that, then I'm wondering just what level of brutality you're going to commit to the screen. And the rape of Sintra should be absolutely disgusting to watch. Like, it should make you hate Nilfgaard for at least a while, because it was an atrocity. Even by the standards of the world, it was an atrocity committed by the Nilfgaardian army.
But without control, chaos will kill you.
And I have no idea what's going on here. I can't even tell who the two characters in this shot really are. Of course, we see that there's a bunch of soldiers with... I'm not sure whose sigil this is. Like, the eagle is traditionally a sigil of Redania, but Redania also traditionally has red in its crest, so I'm not sure. These could be Redanians, could be anyone, could be some minor noble house, but I don't really recall any situation like this in the books. There's no part where some convoy, you might say, gets utterly massacred. So I'm guessing this is actually an original scene, or at least something that was only mentioned in passing in the books, and I can't currently recall. But the way it is, the way you see the blood sprouting out from this little circle in the center, this might not actually have been a monster. This might have been something to do with magic. Again, this is just me speculating, and it's really too early to tell anything concrete. But safe to say they are probably coming up with some original scenes for the series, because, well, I really can't remember anything like this. There is one scene in the books where a manticore attacks a wagon and kills the horses and starts eating on the road, but that's definitely not this scene. And again, the way the blood just spreads out from this central point, this just makes me think magic. But again, we shall have to wait and see.
So that's all life is to you?
Now, I'm going to pause this right here. The chain. I'm really happy they included this, and we get the first decent look at Geralt's armor, which also looks very good. Of course, it's not historically accurate at all, and its pragmatic part is somewhat dubious, but it at least does look like something a Witcher would wear. And of course, the armor is never really the main issue with Witchers. Like, the Witchers don't really require all that much armor to operate, because usually one hit is all that the monster needs to kill them, or at least fatally wound them. So the armor looks very good, at least I enjoy looking at it, and the chain using the Witcher gadgets, that again increases my hopes that if nothing else, at least Geralt is going to be a treat to watch, because Cavill looks great in the suit, he looks fit for the role, and they are actually going to use some Witcher strategies, so that's a bonus.
So that's all life is to you?
So this is, I suppose, the Striga from the very first Witcher story. At least I can't think of any other monster which might fulfill the same role. And from what we see in the trailer and in some other footage, this is definitely going to be a costume. This makes me happy because I am a huge fan of practical effects. I really don't like too much CGI being used on monsters and on creatures in general. So as long as the Striga actually looks, good, as long as it has all the necessary components of looking monstrous and believable, I think that this is a step in the right direction. I would have definitely not preferred a completely CGI Striga, and, I'm open to interpretations as to how she should look, although, again, the game design was pretty rad. And we don't see all of the show design here, so I'm not going to say whether she looks better or worse, but I am going to say that I am a huge fan of practical effects, and I am very happy that they are going to probably be included to some measure at least within the show.
Monsters and money.
No, these past few scenes now. I'm not even going to comment on Triss properly, because about the only thing they get correct about her is that she has brown hair, and that's pretty much where it ends. It's also really funny, because in the story itself, Yennefer is described as looking, well, still extremely young, but more mature, like more adult than Triss. And Triss, of course, also is several decades old by this point, but she's still a kid, basically. She's still very teenager, like in her behavior, in her ideas, in her appearance as well. The Triss we see here just looks much, much older than Yennefer when we eventually get to see her fully formed. So I'm not really going to comment on her. She looks nothing like Triss, and if I did not know which actress was playing Triss, I would not have recognized her as Triss. And her costume, again, just doesn't look like something a sorceress would wear, especially because sorceresses, they love their fancy garments. They love, jewelry, they love decorations on their clothing. They're not really about the simple clothes. That's what the other characters should be about. So yeah, it just doesn't look fitting. And much and more has been said about how swole Geralt is in this version, about how swole Cavill is. And some people take an issue with that. I personally don't. It is true that in the source material, Geralt was described as thin, gaunt almost, and fairly, medium-sized guy. He was not a giant, but it's never really an important factor in the story, unlike some other changes, which are pretty damn important. So it might look out of place in some scenes, but it's generally one of the smallest issues I see with the series.
It's all it needs to be.
Something out there waits for you.
So, this, I suppose, is definitely the court of Sintra, and I suppose the person in the yellow clothes in the forefront there is either Calante or Pavetta. I can't really tell for certain who is who because I don't know which actress is playing whom. And of course, we get a bit more diversity right there in the right. And well, I am definitely going to make a separate video on that issue in the near future. But for now, this is the Cintran court, and I suppose this is a part of the Hedgehog of Erlenwald story. Or at least I think it is, because I can't think of any other scene which takes place directly in Sintra, or at least in the castle. So the costumes look decent. Again, the armor is pretty well done. On the right, we actually get some other type of armors. I'm wondering, they're also wearing bourgeonet helmets, so I'm wondering whether these are all just the regular Cintran soldiers, and the guys on the left are the honor guard with the more decorative armor. But generally, Sintra just looks pretty okay.
This child.
We get another look at Ciri, this time as a princess. And I suppose the person standing in front of her there was Calanthe, because Pavetta, by the time Ciri is this old, is already dead for, well, some time. So I don't really have a whole lot to say about this frame, except again, Ciri looks pretty well. Now, the guy who's talking right here, I had real trouble figuring out who he was, or who he was meant to be. Because I couldn't think of a single person who would be talking to Geralt about Cirilla in this kind of manner, and who actually looked like him. And then I realized that he's meant to be Ermion, or I have no idea how you properly translate his name. Mousak, Ermion, Mishilov. I really don't know. The druid. The druid from the first couple of stories. Now, let me ask you people, and I suppose all of you know at least something about Celtic culture and Celtic mythology. Does this person look at all like a druid? Like, is there anything that to you speaks of him being a druid? It certainly doesn't to me. First of all, he's meant to be a whole lot older, and of course, druids don't remain permanently young like sorceresses. They do, and they are able of aging, and no, they are able to stop aging, or at least to drastically expand their lifespans, but they are going to age all the while, and Ermion is pretty damn old, being the highest druid of the Council of Druids in Skellige and so on, so he definitely should be a whole lot older. But more importantly than that, the costume he's wearing once again looks like a costume, and once again it's completely by the numbers. There is nothing that speaks about him as being from a different culture, from a different land. And Skellige is very different to the rest of the continent. So I'm not sold at all. Like, if you told me this was Mousak, I would not have believed you. So I honestly don't see why this was done again, but I guess we'll wait and see.
Will be extraordinary.
And I have no idea what this is, or at least what this could be in the first season. Of course, Ciri does eventually get lost in the desert, but we don't really get to see that in the first couple of books, so I'm wondering what this is meant to be. Maybe it's probably just a vision due to how the scene is framed and so on. But I can't recall a tree in any of the visions from The Witcher. Again, probably we'll have to wait and see.
Yennefer, imagine the most powerful woman in the world.
Well, now we get our first look at Yennefer fully formed, and well, she also looks pretty okay. The purple eyes are a bit out of touch, in my opinion. Like, they don't look maybe genuine enough is the main word, but again, the actress is wearing contact lenses, and there's no one in the real world with purple eyes, so I guess it's okay. And the costume itself, it still looks kind of like a costume, and the medallion Yennefer is wearing with the stars, yeah, it doesn't look very good, but the costume itself is okay, at least. It's by far not the worst we see in the trailer.
Do you have what it takes?
Now we get the Battle of Sintra, or maybe this is Battle of Sodden Hill, I have no idea. Probably Sintra. And now, people, honestly tell me, when are we going to stop seeing medieval armies clashing with each other in massive, unorganized brawls? This is not how warfare was conducted in medieval era, and it is, in my opinion, far less entertaining. It's also completely insane from a strategic viewpoint, because if you have a giant melee without any kind of formations and any kind of, well, command hierarchy in place, you're going to lose a lot of people, a lot more than you need to, by any measure. So I don't really see the reason behind this. It's really strange to me why film producers continuously and constantly keep making these decisions to have giant battles descend into massive brawls. Yeah, I honestly would have preferred for a change something more tactical, something more realistic, especially because Battle of Brenna might well be one of the best described battles in fantasy history, you might say, at least in my opinion, because we do get a sense of the formations, of the movements of the various units, or we get an overlook of the battlefield as the battle is taking place, and we also get POVs from the ground who are, locked in combat, who are trying to hold the line and so on, and they paint a very different picture than a massive all-out charge of two massive armies. So, yeah. And now we get to my favorite part of the trailer. Yeah, Nilfgaardian armor. Why? Why does this? On all accounts, the symbol in the center just looks like, the little paper medallion children make in kindergarten. The armor itself looks like it's made of plastic, because it probably is. The helmets are... I used to bitch a lot about the Lannister helmets, but this just takes the cake. It's completely and utterly impractical and looks god awful. And the armor itself is just, I'm not sure who would even come up with a design like that. Like, can anyone, and I'm genuinely curious, can anyone find an armor similar to this in history, like, at all? What's it even made of in universe? It's certainly not metal, because, well, I can't imagine a way of how you might fold steel to, well, look like this. Well, all in all, this is by far the biggest atrocity in the entire trailer. And I am looking forward to Geralt killing Nilfgaardians solely because of the fact now that I won't have to look at that god-awful armor more than I have to.
She's why they came. You can't outrun destiny just because you're terrified of it. It's coming.
So we see a couple of things here. This is definitely the story of the urchin of Erlenwald, and the guy who's standing, and I'm pretty sure this is Pavetta right here, the guy who's standing right next to her is pretty convincing. I mean, at least I like the way they designed him, that he doesn't actually have a completely urchin head, but that the spikes are basically his hair and so on and so on. I really like that design, so I think that's one of the better costumes shown in the trailer, and we do get a better look at him a bit later. But I also like how they're going to actually show how powerful the Elder Blood is, because you can see dozens of people just flying away, and the scene was pretty powerful in the book itself, So I'm wondering just how flashy the magic is going to be, whether it's just going to be, telekinetic force, or whether there's actually going to be blue lightning and something along those lines. But as long as they make furniture fly, I'm happy.
Can't outrun destiny just because you're terrified of it. It's coming.
Now we get Yennefer in her full costume, and again, the medallion she has doesn't really look very good, in my opinion. At least both the medallions that Ciri and Geralt have later on in the show look far, far better. But the costume itself is nice, and it, for once, actually looks like something a sorceress would wear. It looks pretty flashy, pretty well made, and it's just something I can imagine Yennefer wearing. Now this, just like the talk about magic being given to humans by elves, this is a pretty big lore break, but for a different reason. Cirilla and Geralt in the story are bound by fate, and that is a pretty big issue, because fate is a pretty important factor in the story. A whole lot of unlikely things happen in the story just because, as the author puts it, they were fated to happen that way, and that's what gives the story of The Witcher these epic proportions of destiny and so on. And we hear Ermion talking about destiny just a second before this shot is shown, and what I suppose is happening here is that
It's coming.
I suppose this is Calante. I'm not sure, but I can't really think of a different person who this might be. Of course, Calante was also meant to be blonde and not brown-skinned, but again, we'll get to that in a separate video. But the far bigger problem here is that she's actually telling Cirilla to go and search for Geralt, which is not something she was told to do, and in fact, Calante initially tried to hide Cirilla from Geralt, and then when Geralt came and said that he didn't really have an interest in taking Cirilla with him, Calante kind of forgot about the issue, or well, she didn't forget it, she just let it out of her mind because she considered the matter done. And she certainly didn't send Cirilla to find Geralt, because there were plenty of other people whom she trusted more to take care of Cirilla. The reason why Ciri ends up with Geralt is of course destiny, and the way they meet each other is a complex series of coincidences, you might say, that eventually lead them together. And the reader is left questioning, was it actually destiny, or was it just a series of lucky coincidences? And that's one of the charms of the Witcher series, it always keeps you guessing in this regard. But no, here Calante just outright tells Ciri to go and find Geralt for some reason. I guess she has had a change of heart before dying and so on. Yeah, this is a pretty big lore break, and it's going to make explaining a bunch of other things that have to happen later in the series very, very difficult. Now we get the first few shots of Geralt actually, fighting. I'm not sure how this is going to go down. Night King himself, Vladimir Furdik from my home country, Slovakia, is going to be one of the directors for the fight choreography. I would have preferred if they hired someone actually trained in HEMA, because to the best of my knowledge, Furdik is not actually a HEMA practitioner, he is merely a stuntman, and I would have really appreciated at least some HEMA techniques shown in The Witcher, but I don't really have any idea what the choreography is going to be like, so as long as it looks halfway convincing and is not too jump cut, which I detest in action scenes, I think it's going to be a pass, mostly.
I can't do this without you!
Now, this scene is also interesting because what appears to be happening in the back is some kind of orgy, maybe. It's kind of hard to tell, but it does seem like some kind of, pagan Roman style festivity, and that's very bizarre because I can't recall anything like this happening. Maybe it's a vision. Geralt does have this kind of, bewitched look on his face, and Yennefer does look at him very, very curiously. But of course, this is probably when they first meet, or when they meet after a long time. And not only have Yennefer and Geralt not met under these circumstances, they have actually never met at anything similar. The closest thing they came to was the Thanet Ball, which was a far more, diplomatic affair, you might say, than what is happening in the background. Of course, it was still extremely pervy and, what's the word, promiscuous, because, well, sorceresses, but I don't know. I can't recall a situation like this in the books, and this is definitely not how they first meet in the books. So I'm wondering what scene this is meant to be.
No matter what you choose, you'll come out.
Yes, I wanted to pause at this right here, because here we get a far better look at the Urchin of Erlenwald, and I have to say the practical effects, the Striga and the Urchin, for now, they look very good. I think they are some of the highlights in the trailer. So, the Urchin of Erlenwald, of course, becomes a pretty important character, although you wouldn't actually think so, seeing him for the first time. And the story itself is probably going to be one of my favorite ones, because the costumes actually look nice, the special effects look nice, the Elder Blood special effects also look pretty promising, and, well, it's focused mostly around Geralt, so I have my hopes up, at least for this particular episode.
You'll come out bloody.
And I have no idea what's going on in the last few shots. We see Geralt fighting, and I think this is Blaviken, where he's actually doing the combat. Maybe it could be some other place, but I'm pretty sure it's Blaviken. We see Yennefer fighting, or, well, fighting. She's screaming and holding her hands out, so I presume she's trying to fight something. But I'm wondering whether this is the first time they meet, because, well, they meet under very tumultuous circumstances, and this could be something that is, I'm not even sure why I'm not spoiling it since I already spoiled so much from the books, but either way, I think this would actually be a far better setting for their first meeting, because Yennefer is in deep trouble the first time the two of them meet. And this is Tisaya. I think she's not actually in combat with anyone. I think she's just, showing off her magic. And I can't really say which scene that is, because of course we don't really see a whole lot of Tisaya in the books. We only hear about her. And we have our first CGI monster, and I'm not sure what kind of monster this is. Of course, it could be any number of creatures, but to me this looks like the Koschei. And the Koschei, well, the bastardized version of the Koschei that Sapkowski created for his world, is basically a giant stony spider. So this really evokes the Koschei in my opinion, but it's also hiding in a swamp, which is something Zeugles do. But Zeugles, of course, look far more like giant octopuses than like giant, spiders or crabs or whatever the hell this thing is meant to be. So I'm not sure what this is, and I certainly don't recall Geralt fighting either a Koschei or a Zeugl in a forest. He does fight a Zeugl in a city, so probably this is also one of those original stories, which is a shame because we don't see a whole lot of the other, important stories within the setting. We don't see any, Golden Dragon. We don't see any Beauty and the Beast ripoff. We don't see any vampires. I'm hoping all of these things will be included because at least some of the actors have been cast for these respective roles. But I'm really hoping that we get to see these stories as well, and that it won't all be, original stories, because this is definitely an original. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And for the final shot, someone hasn't been spending enough points in the toxicity department, have they? I'm sorry, I really had to make that joke. Yeah, Geralt looks pretty damn stoned in this picture, but I actually like that because, well, he doesn't look very healthy in this picture, and the things that the Witchers pour into themselves, yeah, they're definitely not meant for consumption, at least not by regular people. So I do actually like the effect that his eyes make when he's overdosed on toxins. And that's pretty much it. Now, final thoughts. I really don't like the costumes. I have a lot of issues with the race bending, which I'll cover in a separate video, most likely. And I also don't like the atmosphere. Now, you might think this strange because, well, The Witcher is a pretty dark and depressing story at the end of the day, but I don't like the lighting they're using specifically. This kind of dark, Zack Snyder-like lighting where the sun never really shines and so on. I think it's cheap and it's not unsettling in the correct way. Take the Witcher games, for example. You had places where the sun could be shining bright in the sky and so on, and you still had scenes that were absolutely chilling and terrifying and which made highly uncomfortable. So I'm wondering what exactly was the thought process behind making the show so dark or poorly lit English. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. I really do like Geralt, I really do like Cirilla. I like a couple of other character designs, probably Tisaya is the foremost amongst them. And well, for now we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. Until next time, good fortune to you, friends.
At the end of the path, I rest my weary feet. At the end of the path, in quiet comfort.